Being a smaller firm, like many of your peers, how have you approached applying technology to stay competitive and then continue to deliver value, right? Because it's not quite as simple or easy at a certain size.
If I had started 10 years before or 15 years before or something, then there was all this complexity of IT and on-prem stuff, and that added, needed to have a server and all this stuff, right? So not needing any of that, I think gives opportunities to smaller firms or even sole practitioners that didn't exist before. So that, from that side of things, it's, if not an advantage, it certainly opens up doors that maybe weren't there before. In terms of like bigger initiatives, there's challenge of
What's holding small AEC firms back from making smarter tech moves? And what sets the successful ones apart? In this episode of the AEC AI and Tech Strategy podcast, we discuss how smaller firms can scale effectively by adopting the right technologies with intention and precision. I'm joined by Matthew Copeland, PE, founder and president of Copeland Building Envelope Consulting. We'll be talking about how small teams can stay competitive by focusing on tools that actually move the needle without compromising on technical excellence. If you're a leader in a growing firm looking to make confident, high-impact tech investments, this conversation is filled with real-world strategies you can use right away. Before we jump in, I want to tell you about our AEC PM Connect event, built for project managers who want to improve project delivery, communication, and leadership through practical sessions and tools. These events provide an avenue to connect with leading PMs in the industry. Our next event will be on June 10th, 2026 at the Forest Gate Country Club in New Jersey. Visit aecpmconnect.com and register today. I hope to see you there. With that, let's jump into today's episode. Okay, it's now time for our conversation of the week with Matt Copeland. Matt, thank you so much for taking the time to join the show, and welcome.
Happy to, Nick. Thank you.
Absolutely. So, Matt, my question that I always get us kicked off with is just finding out a little bit more about kind of our guest. So could you share a bit more about yourself and the journey that led you to found Copeland BEC? And if you're not familiar to the audience, BEC stands for Building Envelope Consulting.
Cool. Yeah, I actually started off my college career thinking I was going to what I thought was computer software design. When I was in high school, I was thinking about where to go to college and what I wanted to do. And I knew I liked computers, but what I thought of as computers at the time was the software. I didn't really have all that much interest in the electronics. So I went to Northeastern and picked computer engineering, which come to find out is not actually software focused. I didn't quite do my research, I guess. And so I showed up and found out that I'd be doing a lot more essentially electrical engineering type stuff, which was fine, but it wasn't really exciting me all that much my first year. So one of my good friends at the time, had a coffee table book that had all these tall buildings and bridges in like really nice glossy photos. And I was flipping through that and showing obvious interest. And she was like, you should switch to civil engineering. I think that's much more up your alley. So I started going to ASCE meetings and things like that, and realized that I really did like civil and structural engineering. So I did switch, finished out my college studies in civil engineering, thinking I would be a structural engineer, like sizing beams and columns and that kind of thing. And I went to work as a co-op for a firm that did that, and also something they call building technology, which is building enclosure science, building envelope science, building science generally, which I didn't even know existed at the time. So I stumbled my way into this field, which has then become my whole career since then. And then 7 years ago or so now, I decided to go out on my own. I probably to some degree or other had that in my head for a while, and the time seemed right at that point. And I think that entrepreneurial streak had always kind of been there one way or another, and I needed to scratch that itch and went for it. So that's kind of the nutshell version.
So you started in a completely different field, switch at kind of the peaking of interest in a coffee table book, which is actually that's
yeah.
Not, I'm sure not the only thing that went into the sitting, right? But
it was a large part of it, to be perfectly honest. I still have the book, or at least a copy of it.
I'm gonna go stare at my coffee table later for inspiration. Maybe my micronote will tell me something. But so you co-op, and then I'm sure you had a full-time stop in there, but now you're leading what essentially is a small firm in right, the building envelope, enclosures, technology, restoration space. I would say like 90+% of the firms are considered small or medium. So it's not like it's not like a knock or anything to the audience. It's just kind of the industry that we're in. But being a smaller firm, like many of your peers, how have you approached applying technology to stay competitive and then continue to deliver value, right? Because it's not quite as simple or easy at a certain size.
I think there's pros and cons there. Certainly, we're very agile. We can make decisions and changes very quickly. In some ways, the technology world that certainly our firm has grown up in, and for at least a little while before that, was pretty well suited to a smaller entrepreneurial, founder-driven mindset because of all of the software as a service opportunities. So if I had started, I don't know, 10 years before or 15 years before or something, then there was all this complexity of IT and on-prem stuff, and that added, needed to have a server and all this stuff, right? So not needing any of that, I think, gives opportunities to smaller firms or even sole practitioners that didn't exist before. So that, from that side of things, it's if not an advantage, it certainly opens up doors that maybe weren't there before. In terms of like bigger initiatives, there's always the challenge of allocating resources and funding or time or both. That a larger firm may have an actual budget that they can allocate towards something like that, and it's a line item on their larger budget, and they can kind of do those things in it. Just have more flexibility there. So that can be a challenge, but I think overall, it's a much more of an equalizer than a problem. It allows us to compete on a different level in many ways, where we can leverage capabilities and do more as a smaller team than probably would have been possible in the past. We can represent ourselves online in ways that were not possible before, or maybe not taken advantage of as much. So from the perspective of a customer or client, we can present ourselves in a similar fashion to much larger peers, and focus on the experience and the results, as opposed to like whether somebody has the resources to develop a website or something like that. So I think in all those ways, it's been quite a bit of an equalizer and a help more than a hindrance.
Which, and you make a good point of the last, 10 to 15 years changing how you essentially set up a business, and then
Right.
on-prem versus cloud storage and all that. But then, we get into the discussion of the past, less than 3 years with the advent of AI, of course, which we'll get into in a second here. But then what is your approach to evaluating new technology in a small business setting? And can you share a couple of examples of tools or platforms that have significantly impacted the way you guys run the business?
Yeah. Initially, the approach is like Matt has an idea and everybody tries it and we see what happens. And that can be chaotic. I tend to, my default is often to fall in love with some new tool idea and see it as like the savior to a variety of problems that I didn't even know I had. So I know that, and I'm aware of it, and need to kind of put the brakes on a little bit there. What I've learned is like a good guiding principle for, and especially at the firm level, is to really focus on the problems first. Like identify some actual problem or roadblock or inefficiency or something like that that is pervasive and repeated, and then find some technology tool that can help solve that particular problem or make it. We can talk about that too, but as opposed to finding some great tool that is in many ways wonderful, and they have a lot of redeeming qualities, but it doesn't exactly solve any real problem that you currently have, and so you end up inventing problems to then use the tool to solve in a way. And that it becomes especially important, I think, with a smaller team where there's, well, I don't know. Like I said, we're agile, but also like if everybody's like weaving back and forth all different directions all the time, it's tiring and frustrating. And, we maybe have less room, like less slush room to mess around with stuff. Like we want our time to all be effective and used properly. And, we want to be lean and efficient. And so the more kind of meandering, experimenting with different tools and things like that end up not working is, probably more damaging, I think, than maybe it might be if it was part of some defined process of evaluation and like you have a certain amount of time you allocate for that kind of thing. So we have to be careful and mindful. And I think the best way to be mindful is for us that I've found is to really focus on the need first rather than the tool, and then finding some way to apply it. And the most probably example of that is like the most impactful tools for us are kind of the bare like the basics, the foundational ones. Like we use the Google Workspace suite extensively and have been from the beginning, and that has enabled a lot of opportunities for us as a hybrid team, where it really facilitates us working in all different places at all different times, on different devices and things like that. And the collaborative editing, the cloud-based storage, Gmail is a great product. So there's, all of that sort of foundational office software stuff in Workspace has been great, and is a huge part of what we do. We use Slack all day, every day for our internal communications. We do almost no internal email. So Slack has enabled us to really segregate email as like an external communications mechanism and keep our conversations flowing more freely internally in a little more informal, quick, easy to access way. And another that's maybe a little bit more out there is one called, unfortunately named Slab with a B, which for a company that also uses Slack with a CK is confusing at times. But Slab is it's kind of a wiki knowledge base type software that has been very good for us in terms of documenting procedures and standards and sort of just general company knowledge and sharing that across the board so it's accessible for everybody. And we use that pretty extensively. It's something, you could use just Google Docs or something like that too. But there's a few kind of specialty touches that the product has that makes it well suited for that task.
And I'm sure in the case of Slab for knowledge management, SOPs essentially.
Exactly.
And not that I use it, but I think the benefit of having somewhere somebody can click one link to go and then
exactly take you through a file tree or something, and trying to remember where some doc was.
Yeah, and that's, I think, just the organization, if that gets people to use it, it's to be well worth the extra money spent. So I mean,
it's a trivial expense, really. Like it's not they're very reasonable with their seat fees, so it's good.
And so that being kind of the baseline, the foundational, right, able to be used across any business, no matter what you're doing. What about specific niche, right? So again, building envelope systems, what emerging technology or trends are you excited about in diagnostics, design, or forensics?
The main thing for me right now that I really like and interested and excited about is combination of like autonomous platform inspection, so drones essentially, like being able to put eyes, so to speak, on all parts of a building much more cost effectively, and potentially autonomously, either through pre-programmed flights, or I can imagine pretty easily eventually, like even me from my keyboard can order up a drone and it's going to go and fly around and gather the data without even anybody having to go to the site. I can see it, like that technologically seems not too difficult. And then combining that with a variety of sensing technologies like infrared, for example, and then combining both of those with machine learning and AI, interpretive capabilities, pattern matching and things like that. All that together to me is really interesting in a way to dramatically reduce the cost of at least the initial stages of assessments and getting an understanding of like the health essentially of buildings on a wide scale. And like I said, for quite a bit lower initial upfront costs than there would be for a team of us to go out on scaffolding and, document stuff, by hand, spot by spot, and then write a report afterwards and all of that. So that's pretty interesting. And there's a company in particular called Lamar AI, who I think that is doing this, I think among others, but we're very excited about what they're doing, and that sort of space in general, I think is very interesting.
And I like the way you broke it down, Matt, because you have the vehicle, which is, I mean, it could be a drone, it could be a crawler robot, it could be anything. Drones just happen to be most common, most cost effective. Right. But then the data really comes in with the sensors among, like you mentioned, a camera, infrared, and as you get into different substrates, some sort of non-destructive testing, concrete, of course, being the popular one, right? So I really like that, because then you can kind of start to talk about what each's role and how it fits in within the greater diagnostic, right? But then there's still room for humans, because of course, I mean, that can be, I assume that deliverable can be delivered to a client, right? But, there's always that touch that the consultant still has to have, whether because it's preferred or even by law.
Yeah, I would see it as like a really good first step in many cases. And often I think it would be in lieu of nothing, right? So it would be not so much in lieu of a human inspection or a human touch, but it would be the situations where a building otherwise wouldn't get looked at all until there's a much bigger problem at some point down the road when somebody comes in and then like retroactively has to deal with restoration and repair that's much more expensive and invasive and disruptive. I think my hypothesis is the technology like this will make it a lot easier to just have like ongoing uh, data gathering and interpretation and analysis that will help guide the application of more directed efforts better. Like if we can get the cost of that upfront, high level, broad based analysis to a level where it's reasonable as just a cost of doing business of owning a building, and the ROI is apparent because it will flag trouble spots earlier, at least broadly speaking. Like, of course, it's going to miss some things, but if overall we're flagging issues earlier and being able to proactively address them, I would expect that overall is going to be a positive ROI, and it would be in place of things just never getting looked at all until there's a dramatic problem that's obvious to everybody.
And, and to the audience, part of Matt's practice among a couple of cities was in the Boston area and Massachusetts. So, yeah, the great thing about emerging technology is how it kind of starts to open up ideas and models and business lines. And the first thing I go to is, hey, like, you're an owner of a building that falls under like an exterior wall law, like Boston's. Your team gets out there, does the inspection as required, but what if you can say, hey, Mr. Owner, we can use this service to start tracking changes annually in between inspection cycles.
Right.
So you're caught up. Or I think, there's even a case where you have to inspect abandoned buildings even more frequently, right? Could that be a replacement, right, for inspection of essentially something that's not producing any income, right? So again, it's up to, I think, the practitioner to use it responsibly, but it's always exciting to see what you can do.
Yeah, it's like, I think, I view it as augmentation more, right? It's just more data, more information that, then can go into the analysis and the decision making going forward.
And then I think the topic that gets brought up next is like, okay, you got all these new tools, shiny objects, great. How do you maintain the standard of care and the level of technical excellence? So what is that from your guys' perspective? You integrate new tools. How do you make sure that level of technical excellence is kept or even exceeded?
I think it's, keeping a mindset of like the end goal in mind first. Like, I think that's Stephen Covey, right? Start with the end in mind or something like this. But, what are we trying to do in the first place, right? We're trying to create certain deliverables. We're trying to solve a problem for our client, first and foremost, right? And so that has to be the primary goal, no matter what. And we had this discussion the other day with respect to like AI note-taking tools. And should we, offer, say, meeting minutes on a project prepared, with caveated that it's like prepared by AI. So in other words, it would be maybe a lower fee because like we don't have to have somebody sit there and do meeting minutes, but then you put a little caveat that says like this is prepared by Gemini or something like that. My take on that was like, no, like we should certainly consider using one of the AI tools for this. But at the end of the day, we're responsible for that deliverable no matter what, whether Gemini does it or Claude does it or Nick does it or Susan does it, right? Like it doesn't matter. And so whatever tool you're using, to me, is part of the process. And ultimately, the name that stands behind that either, service or deliverable or whatever is responsible. So in the terms of like technical accuracy or something like that, like the report still has to diagnose the issues properly and recommend appropriate solutions. And so if the tools that you're using to create the report, for example, are not consistently providing that outcome, then you need to look at some other process or other tools, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of how I look at it is like at use some new tool that makes one thing easier, but at the cost of some accuracy or some other problem over here, like that's not necessarily going to work out, or you have to look at all of that collectively.
And I think I meant to mention it earlier, but I like the way you phrased it. But any piece of technology or tool, you start with the business problem first.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the opposite, like a solution in search of a problem.
It's very easy to fall into because the tools, I mean, there's infinite amazing tools available now. And you almost have this FOMO of not using it because it just is so cool, right? And like you imagine all these ways that you could make great use of this technology, but really you're just creating those use cases and they didn't exist before. And even if it's a little bit easier to do A, B, and C, like you didn't have to do A, B, and C at all before. And so now you just created something new to do. And okay, you have a tool that makes it a little bit easier, but like it's overall a net negative. So it's something I personally have to fight all the time. I get caught up in the hype and the excitement of these tools for sure. And I need to kind of remind myself that like starting with the business case or even personal life, starting with the actual need first is very important.
And I would say that any of those, right, the two of us included, who get excited about this stuff, but then the applications to our own niches or verticals can pretty easily fall into that. And
Yeah,
just
for sure.
speaking for myself, that was like when I was getting started out, that was like my number one problem. And I like remember like a mentor of mine just telling me, is like, dude, you just have to stop. You just have to like, you just can't, like, it's not going to work. And then since then, you know, having that mindset of like, okay, what is the client paying for? What are they like engaging you to solve? Just get the job done. And then how you do it is, you know, and I think at least the way my thesis is, you see technology and you hear about the sector and how far behind we are as an industry, right, as AEC. And then you got to think, man, like they must be doing something right and having that FOMO. But that's not always the case. I mean, in some cases it is. Like if I had a principal one time who just dictated his reports, had somebody type them out. Like, I bet you today he's still doing that. It would never take advantage of an LLM to just cut out the middleman, right? In other cases, it's maybe not so warranted. So I'm right there with you.
Right. Yeah. So that's where the wisdom comes, right? Is trying to make those decisions of where it makes sense and where not.
Yep. And if you're listening and if you're on the younger side, just go find someone who's been in the game for a while. They'll help you kind of level set expectations, but also don't be discouraged, because sometimes you do know what you're talking about.
Absolutely. I think everybody should have, you should be able to have a discussion about any of these tools or topics or suggestions, right? And like the best idea should win in the end. It just should be defensible, right? If somebody, if the defense of dictating the report out loud to someone who's typing it is that, well, that's how it, I've always done it that way. Then like that's not as good a defense as, well, I tried using the LLM dictation and these are the 5 problems that I ran into. So until we can address those, I'm going to keep doing it this way, right? Like there's, the idea is not the problem. It's just being able to have an open discussion and have like a rational sort of outcome based decision process.
Which of course goes back to culture. And if you have a culture of innovation, or that mindset where like it's okay to have those discussions no matter what level you're at, I think you're going to be a lot more successful. So then how do you foster that culture of innovation given the size of your company when it comes to adopting new tools or processes that might require like a mindset shift?
I try to like just say it a lot. I don't know like what else. I try to model it. I try to say it. I try to be mindful of how we have those discussions, especially if something maybe doesn't work out, and make it an environment where folks feel comfortable trying things and reporting back on what happens. I try to set expectations that we will certainly make mistakes and do things a certain way that in hindsight seems like the wrong way. And that all of it is just part of a learning experience, and just try to keep saying that over and over and over again. I think that's probably it's the best I've come up with, really. And like I said, being careful and mindful of like, if something goes wrong, what's the response and like, what's the follow up from that, and making sure that the experience isn't one that sends the message of like, oh, I see, we really do have to be super conservative and careful because the consequences from failure are catastrophic. Like we don't want that, right? You need to have the actual experience match the rhetoric. So that's at least the goal.
And it's similar to what I call the gap between when you're looking at any startup or technology. Like, what's the gap between marketing, in this case, like what you say the firm's culture is, and then execution, how good the product is. So
Yeah, exactly.
often in the startup space, the marketing wins out a lot.
Right.
But in building that firm culture, right, you want the message to actually match what happens. So I see where
Exactly.
you're coming from.
Yeah.
And on that note, continuing on, firm culture, building a firm, going out on your own as an entrepreneur, one lesson or insight you gained from running such a specialized practice that you wish you knew earlier?
It, actually, so two things come to mind. They're both on the opposite sides of the same coin. And the first is that, and I tell this to anyone who asks me about, they're considering starting a firm, or they are starting a firm, or some other consulting practice or something like that. If they have any intention at all, or even are not adamantly opposed to the idea of in the future adding other folks to their team, is documenting everything they do very early. And I think it's probably a good idea just in general. Like, even if you like just put document for the world, right? Like for your contribution to the evolution of human society or something. It helps you refine your thinking. It helps you clarify what you're doing. And if you ever do want help with anything, it is like exceedingly beneficial to have those kind of resources available to point folks at. And doing it later in the game is just exponentially harder. Just becomes one more burden on your already overburdened schedule, which is why you're looking to get some help in the first place, right? So doing that like from day one, and it's something that I kind of had intention to do even, and I didn't do it as well as I should have. So in hindsight, that's one thing that I like. If I had to go back and talk to myself right as I was starting, that's one thing I would say. And the other side of that same coin is that like no amount of documentation can even come close to matching the importance of the actual people, the actual human beings that are involved. I have learned, that everybody brings unique skills to the table, and has a variety of skills and talents in life, and certain ones are essential for doing this kind of work. And finding, and I still am not I'm not even 50% sure that I could tell you what exactly those are, but I know when I see it, or I know when I've found somebody who has it. And the ability, because I think what it is that this kind of work, I think consulting in general, but I've only really ever done this consulting, so I can't say, is so dependent on an infinite number of very small decisions over and over and over and over all day long, every day. And it's how a person responds and acts and chooses to, or chooses not to act in any given circumstance throughout the day, every day, over the course of a week or month or a career. And it's like, you can't document all of that. Like, it's you can't possibly write all that down. And if you did, nobody would read it. And so it just has to be somebody's kind of innate ability to make the right, quote unquote, decisions more often than not that ultimately lead to success. And to be honest, I think I overestimated the ability to like just hand somebody a guidebook and be like, oh, this is how you do it. And I probably overestimated my ability to document it, which was certainly true. Overestimated the ability for somebody to then absorb that and do it, when really it comes down to much more like just the individual and his or her ability to sort of independently get it and just problem solve in real time every day, all day.
I think part of that, Matt, is like knowing what tasks or what part of the business is like, yeah, there's like a playbook is perfect for this. But then there's the others, right, where you in your guys' case, right, maybe you show up and a piece of cornice just fell from 6 stories up, and you get a very nervous owner in the building department, right, looking at you like, so what are we doing here, right?
Yeah.
Like,
And it's like that 1,000 times. And it's like when I was younger, I worked in a like a farm stand I was the cashier, and I stocked the shelves and stuff like that. And like, okay, like for that, you can write a few procedures, and the sort of total realm of possibilities of encounters that staff member is going to run into is like relatively small. It's like, what do you do if there's no more apples in the back? Like, well, I don't know. You put a sign that says there's no apples, right? Like, it's not like as complicated in terms of what somebody could run into and the overall number of decisions they have to make through their shift on that day. So, you can document that very well, and most people that walk into that job could probably do it pretty well. If they're, like, it isn't with the baseline understanding of like that whoever is in the job like wants to be there, wants to do a good job, is motivated in general to do a good job, like but even with that baseline, in a field like ours, as far as I can tell, there's just so much complexity on a moment to moment basis that it really takes, but a unique skill set to sort that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I do think like the human technology collaboration in our industry in particular is what's going to win out. I think you agree that I guess time will tell, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Any final piece of advice you'd like to share with AEC leaders, engineers, architects who are navigating technology decisions in small and mid-sized firms?
I would just say, and I've been thinking about this a lot the last few days, and it's related to what we've been talking about. Probably, in a few words, like bump the brakes just a little bit. Like be open-minded and be excited, and be aware and updated and understand what's going on. But at the same time, like be careful of getting too enamored, I think, and be careful of getting and finding problems to fill with your solutions. Really start from the problem first, identify that, define it very clearly, and then find a solution. And we didn't talk too much about, but like you can also make a solution now. Like, it's much easier to just make a solution for these things. So, and that's that's an example of like a problem that does exist where you have a bunch of tools, none of them are quite right. And now there is a solution that really helps you to solve that specific problem. So I think, I've, as I said, had a tendency to maybe get a little bit over enamored and overexcited about navigating these opportunities and trying to take advantage of all of them, when really it's important to just slow down a little bit. So I'm like, I still use a paper notebook, right? Like there's sometimes when old school is very helpful. And even now, like Google Workspace is kind of old school these days, right? Like it's been around for a while, and people are using Notion or something else, and or like whatever. There's a million different tools now, so just find a problem, define it really clearly, and then work on the solution.
Really well said. As you did mention, creating solutions of your own, it's arguably never been easier. Also,
100%.
arguably never been more dangerous, depending on
true.
what you,
very true.
what you're trying to do. So that's a whole other discussion. But Matt, thank you again so much for taking the time to join us today. The audience wants to connect with you, ask you any more questions about what we discussed today. What's the best way for them to reach you?
Yeah, so check out our website at copelandbec.com. You can find out more about us, and you can contact us as a firm there. You can email me directly, matt@copelandbec.com. That's probably best. And I'm at times super active on LinkedIn, and at other times abandon it completely, so you can take your chances.
Well, Matt, again, it has been an absolute pleasure. We'll be sure to get your contact information in the show notes, so anyone who's interested can reach out. But again, thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
Thanks, Nick. I had fun.
Absolutely. Until next time. Please remember, you can find the show notes for this episode at aectechpodcast.com. There, you'll find a summary of the key points discussed in today's episode, as well as links to any of the resources, websites, or books mentioned during this episode. Until next time, I wish you the best in all your engineering and technology endeavors.